Marcus Reed had always known that stepping into the role of police chief in a new town would come with its challenges, but he never expected his introduction to the community to begin with flashing lights and handcuffs. It was late afternoon when Marcus decided to take an unplanned drive through Silverwood, the town he would soon oversee. Dressed in a casual hoodie and jeans, driving his black SUV, he looked like any other passerby. The purpose of his visit was simple: to get a feel for the community before his official start next week. He wanted to see the streets he would serve, the neighborhoods he would protect, and the people he hoped to connect with, not as a symbol of authority but as one of them. Silverwood was a quiet, seemingly idyllic town, nestled between rolling hills and lined with historic brick buildings. Yet beneath its charming surface lay unspoken tensions. For decades, the town's police department had been criticized for its lack of diversity and a string of incidents that had eroded trust between the force and the community, particularly its minority residents. The appointment of Marcus as the first black police chief was heralded as a step toward progress by some, while others viewed it with skepticism or outright resistance. Marcus was aware of these dynamics but believed he could prove himself through action and integrity. As Marcus drove through the town's main street, he noticed the faint hum of a patrol car behind him. He glanced in his rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of two officers inside. He thought nothing of it at first. After all, it was a small town, and patrol cars were a common sight. But as the cruiser stayed on his tail, even as he turned onto quieter streets, Marcus began to sense that this wasn't a coincidence. At a stop sign, he noticed the patrol car pull up close enough for him to feel the weight of their scrutiny. He sighed, debating whether to stop and let them pass or to continue driving. Before he could decide, the unmistakable sound of a siren pierced the air, and the red and blue lights flooded his rearview mirror. Marcus pulled over to the side of the road, his heart pounding, not out of fear but frustration. He rolled down his window and waited as the officers approached. The lead officer, a middle-aged man with a stern face and a badge that read Officer Daniels, leaned down to look at Marcus. "License and registration," Daniels said curtly, his hand resting on the holster of his gun. Marcus calmly handed over the requested documents, his expression unreadable. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked, his voice steady but firm. "We've had reports of a vehicle matching this description involved in suspicious activity," Daniels replied, his tone sharp. The second officer, a younger man, stood behind him, eyeing Marcus warily. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Suspicious activity? I can assure you, I haven't done anything of the sort." Daniels wasn't convinced. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered. Marcus hesitated for a moment, considering his options. He could explain who he was right then and there, but something told him it wouldn't make a difference, not yet. Reluctantly, he stepped out of the car, his hands visible and his demeanor composed. As Daniels began to question him, the situation escalated. Marcus's polite answers seemed only to irritate the officers, who pressed harder, insinuating that he was being evasive. Marcus, who had dealt with his share of confrontations during his law enforcement career, remained calm but inwardly seethed at the injustice of the situation. A small crowd began to gather, drawn by the sight of flashing lights and the tension in the air. Among them was a local shopkeeper who had read the recent article in the town paper about the incoming police chief. He recognized Marcus almost immediately, his face a mixture of shock and disbelief. "Wait a second," the shopkeeper called out, stepping closer. "That's Marcus Reed. He's the new police chief." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Daniels froze, his eyes darting between Marcus and the shopkeeper. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice laced with doubt. The shopkeeper repeated himself, louder this time. "He's the new police chief. I saw his picture in the paper last week." Daniel's face turned pale as realization set in. Marcus, who had remained silent through the exchange, finally spoke. "I was going to mention that," he said, his tone carrying a mix of restraint and irony, "but I wanted to see how far this would go. The younger officer stepped back, visibly shaken, while Daniels fumbled for words. There must have been some mistake, he stammered. Marcus crossed his arms, his gaze steady. Yes, Officer Daniels. There was. The crowd murmured, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others pulling out their phones to record the unfolding drama. Daniels awkwardly handed back Marcus's documents, mumbling an apology that did little to mask his embarrassment. As Marcus climbed back into his SUV, he paused to look at the officers. "We'll talk about this later," he said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who wasn't just their superior but someone who had earned his position through years of hard work and resilience. The crowd parted as Marcus drove away, leaving Daniels and his partner standing in stunned silence. The incident would soon ripple through the town, sparking debates and uncovering deeply rooted issues that Marcus knew he would have to address. But for now, he drove on, determined to turn this moment of humiliation into an opportunity for change. Marcus Reed had always been a man of quiet resilience, and his path to becoming the first black police chief of Silverwood was anything but straightforward. Born and raised in a bustling city far from the quiet streets of Silverwood, Marcus learned early on that life was rarely fair. His mother, a school teacher, and his father, a factory worker, instilled in him the values of hard work, respect, and standing tall in the face of adversity. As a teenager, Marcus experienced the sting of racial profiling firsthand. He remembered one incident vividly, walking home from basketball practice, his gym bag slung over his shoulder, when two officers stopped him, demanding to know where he was going and what he was carrying. They didn't believe his simple answers until they searched his bag and found nothing but sneakers and a jersey. The humiliation of that moment stayed with him, but it also fueled his determination to change the system from within. After high school, Marcus attended a state university, majoring in criminal justice. He excelled academically, earning scholarships that allowed him to graduate with honors. But it was his time in the campus law enforcement internship program that solidified his desire to become a police officer. He wanted to be the kind of officer who protected and served with integrity, treating everyone with the respect they deserved. Marcus joined the police academy shortly after graduation and quickly rose through the ranks in the Metropolitan Police Department where he began his career. Over the years, he gained a reputation for his ability to de-escalate tense situations and his commitment to community engagement. He worked in some of the most challenging neighborhoods, building trust with residents and mentoring young officers. But Marcus's rise wasn't without its struggles. Many of his peers respected him, but others resented his success, seeing him as a threat to the status quo. He faced subtle and overt racism, from offhand comments about affirmative action to being passed over for promotions despite his impeccable record. Still, Marcus persevered, refusing to let the bias of others dictate his trajectory. When the opportunity to become the chief of police in Silverwood arose, Marcus hesitated. He had heard about the town's challenges, its predominantly white police force, a history of strained relationships with minority communities, and a reputation for being resistant to change. But the challenge intrigued him. He saw an opportunity to make a real difference, not just for the department but for the entire town. After several interviews and a rigorous selection process, Marcus was offered the position. The announcement of his appointment was met with mixed reactions. Some residents, particularly those in the town's small but vocal minority communities, welcomed the news, viewing it as a long overdue step toward progress. Others were skeptical, questioning whether an outsider, especially one who didn't look like the majority of the town's residents, could understand or effectively lead Silverwood's police force. The officers in the department were similarly divided. Some were cautiously optimistic, hoping Marcus's reputation for fairness and professionalism would bring much-needed reforms. Others, however, were resistant, viewing his appointment as a threat to their way of doing things. Marcus knew he had his work cut out for him, but he was ready. Before officially starting his new role, Marcus wanted to learn more about Silverwood firsthand. He believed in leading by example and wanted to understand the community he would be serving. That's what led him to that fateful day when he decided to take an unplanned drive through town, dressed casually and blending in with the residents. The irony of being pulled over by the very officers who would soon report to him was not lost on Marcus. As he drove back to his temporary lodging after the incident, he reflected on the challenges ahead. This wasn't just about the two officers who had detained him, it was about a culture that allowed assumptions and biases to dictate actions. He knew that changing that culture would require more than policies and training, it would require patience, persistence, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. Marcus also thought about the community's role in shaping the department's future. He knew trust couldn't be built overnight, especially in a town where divisions ran deep. He envisioned town hall meetings, ride-alongs with officers, and outreach programs to bridge the gap between the police and the people they served. As he parked his SUV and walked into his lodging, Marcus glanced at his phone. Messages of support and concern had already started pouring in from those who had heard about the incident. A few of his future colleagues had even reached out, expressing embarrassment and offering apologies on behalf of the department. Marcus appreciated their words, but he also knew this was just the beginning. In the quiet of his room, Marcus pulled out a notebook and began jotting down ideas. He outlined plans for implicit bias training, community forums, and recruitment initiatives to diversify the department. He made a list of priorities for his first month as chief, determined to hit the ground running. As the evening turned to night, Marcus found himself replaying the day's events in his mind. The officers' initial hostility, the crowd's reactions, the shopkeeper's intervention, all of it painted a vivid picture of the work that lay ahead. Yet, despite the challenges, Marcus felt a sense of purpose. This wasn't just a job, it was an opportunity to prove that change was possible, even in a place like Silverwood. The next day, Marcus decided to keep a low profile, spending time reviewing reports and getting acquainted with the department's structure. But the incident had already spread through the town, sparking conversations and debates. Some saw it as a wake-up call, a moment that highlighted the need for introspection and growth. Others dismissed it as a misunderstanding, unwilling to confront the deeper issues it revealed. For Marcus, the incident was a reminder of why he had taken the job in the first place. He wasn't here to be liked or to maintain the status quo. He was here to lead, to challenge, and to inspire. And as the new police chief of Silverwood, he was determined. The morning after the incident, Marcus Reed awoke to a flurry of text messages, emails, and phone calls. News of the previous day's events had spread rapidly, and the reactions were as varied as the people of Silverwood themselves. Some messages were supportive, from community leaders and residents expressing their hope that his leadership could bring about much-needed change. Others were more cautious, even skeptical, weren't sure they were ready for. Marcus took a deep breath and turned to address the room. "I want to start by saying that yesterday's events were eye-opening," he began, his voice calm but authoritative. "Not just for me, but for this department and this community. It was a reminder of why I'm here and the work we have ahead of us." Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his face flushed. The younger officer beside him kept his gaze fixed on the floor. Marcus didn't single them out, but his words carried an unmistakable weight. "I'm not here to point fingers or assign blame," Marcus continued. "What happened yesterday wasn't about two officers making a mistake, it was about a culture that allows assumptions to dictate actions. That's what we need to address. Together." There was a moment of silence, the weight of his words sinking in. Then, slowly, Harlow nodded. "Chief, I think I speak for everyone when I say we're ready to work with you to make this department better." Marcus appreciated the sentiment, though he knew words alone wouldn't be enough. He decided to take things a step further. "I'd like to meet with each of you individually over the next few weeks," he said, addressing the room. "I want to understand your perspectives, your concerns, and your ideas for how we can move forward. This isn't just about me leading, it's about all of us working together." The officers exchanged glances, some nodding in agreement while others remained wary. Marcus knew he had a long road ahead, but this was a start. Later that afternoon, Marcus met with the town's mayor, Susan Whitaker, to discuss the incident and its fallout. Susan was a pragmatic woman in her early 40s, known for her no-nonsense approach to leadership. She had been one of Marcus's strongest advocates during the hiring process, believing that his experience and vision could bring much-needed change to Silverwood. "The incident yesterday has stirred up quite a bit of controversy," Susan said, leaning back in her chair as they sat in her office. "Some people are calling it a wake-up call, while others are using it as an excuse to question your appointment." Marcus nodded. "I expected as much. Change is never easy, especially in a town like this. But I'm not here to win a popularity contest. I'm here to do the job." Susan smiled faintly. "That's exactly why we hired you. But I want to make sure you have the support you need, especially in these early days. If there's anything I can do to help, let me know." "Thank you, Mayor," Marcus replied. "I think the best thing we can do right now is show the community that we're serious about addressing these issues. That means being transparent, taking accountability, and involving the public in the process." Over the next few days, Marcus worked tirelessly to lay the groundwork for his tenure. He met with community leaders, listened to their concerns, and began drafting plans for a series of town hall meetings to foster dialogue between the police department and the residents they served. He also scheduled mandatory training sessions on implicit bias and de-escalation techniques for all officers, emphasizing that these were not optional but necessary steps toward building a more inclusive and effective department. Meanwhile, the incident continued to dominate local conversations. News outlets picked up the story, framing it as a reflection of the broader challenges facing law enforcement across the country. For some in Silverwood, it was a moment of reckoning, a chance to confront the biases and assumptions that had long gone unexamined. For others, it was a source of frustration, a sign that change might bring discomfort and disruption. Marcus received his share of criticism, from anonymous emails questioning his qualifications to comments on social media doubting his ability to lead. But he also received an outpouring of support from residents who saw in him a beacon of hope, a leader willing to face difficult truths and fight for a better future. Through it all, Marcus remained focused. He knew that real change wouldn't happen overnight, but he was determined to build a foundation for progress. And as he stood in his office late one evening, reviewing his notes and plans, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would be challenging, but Marcus was no stranger to challenges. He had faced them his entire life, and he was ready to face them again, for himself, for his team, and for the people of Silverwood. The day of Marcus Reed's official swearing-in ceremony as the new police chief of Silverwood arrived with a mixture of anticipation and tension. The town hall auditorium was packed with attendees, ranging from curious residents to skeptical officers and a small but vocal group of community activists. The atmosphere was electric, charged with the hope of change and the resistance of those clinging to the status quo. Marcus stood behind the curtain, adjusting his tie as he glanced at his reflection in the small mirror backstage. His calm demeanor belied the whirlwind of emotions beneath the surface. This moment wasn't just the culmination of his career but a turning point for a town grappling with its identity. He took a deep breath, reminding himself of his purpose. He wasn't here to please everyone, he was here to lead. When his name was announced, the audience erupted in a mix of applause and murmurs. Marcus walked to the podium, his stride confident and deliberate. He scanned the crowd, taking note of the faces before him, the hopeful, the doubtful, and the outright resistant. Among them, he spotted Daniels and the younger officer from the infamous traffic stop. Their expressions were unreadable, but Marcus wasn't there to dwell on the past. He was there to shape the future. "Good evening," he began, his voice steady and resonant. "I want to start by thanking all of you for being here tonight. Whether you're here out of support, curiosity, or even skepticism, your presence matters. It shows that you care about this town and its future, and that's something we can build on." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "When I accepted this role, I knew it wouldn't be easy. Silverwood is a town with a rich history, but like any community, it also has its challenges. My goal as your police chief is not just to address those challenges but to work with all of you to create a safer, more equitable future for everyone." The crowd listened intently as Marcus outlined his vision: increased community engagement, transparent policing practices, and initiatives to build trust between the department and the residents. He spoke of the importance of accountability, not just for officers but for himself as a leader. His words were met with a mix of nods and skeptical stares, but Marcus had expected no less. Change was a process, and he was ready to earn the trust of those who doubted him. After the ceremony, Marcus stayed to mingle with attendees, answering questions and listening to concerns. Some interactions were encouraging, like the elderly woman who thanked him for his commitment to fairness or the young man who shared his hopes for better relationships between the police and the community. Others were more challenging, such as the business owner who bluntly asked how Marcus planned to handle the riffraff he believed were causing problems in town. Marcus responded with patience and clarity, emphasizing his belief in addressing root causes rather than perpetuating stereotypes. As the evening wore on, Marcus noticed Daniels lingering near the edge of the crowd. The officer looked conflicted, as if debating whether to approach. Finally, he stepped forward, his posture stiff but his expression earnest. "Chief Reed," Daniels began, his voice low. I want to apologize for what happened the other day. We didn't know who you were, and I made assumptions I shouldn't have." Marcus regarded him calmly, sensing the weight of the moment. "Thank you for saying that," he replied. "But this isn't just about me. It's about what those assumptions say about how we approach our work. We all have room to grow, Daniels, including me." Daniels nodded, relief flickering across his face. It was a small step, but Marcus saw it as a sign of progress. Building trust within the department would be just as important as building it with the community, and moments like this were a start. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Marcus immersed himself in the day-to-day operations of the department, conducting one-on-one meetings with officers, reviewing policies, and identifying areas for improvement. He implemented mandatory implicit bias training, brought in community leaders to speak with officers about their experiences, and established a citizen advisory board to provide input on departmental decisions. Each step was met with varying degrees of resistance and support, but Marcus remained steadfast in his mission. Outside the department, Marcus made a point of being visible in the community. He attended neighborhood meetings, visited schools, and even joined local events like charity runs and farmers markets. His presence was deliberate, a way to show residents that he wasn't just an authority figure but a partner invested in their well-being. One particularly memorable encounter occurred during a town hall meeting, where a young black teenager named Jamal stood up to share his story. Jamal described being stopped by police multiple times while walking home from school, his voice trembling with frustration and fear. "I just want to feel safe," he said, his eyes welling with tears. "I don't want to be scared every time I see a police car." The room fell silent, the weight of Jamal's words hanging heavily in the air. Marcus felt a pang of empathy, remembering his own experiences as a teenager. He approached the microphone, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Jamal, thank you for sharing your story," he said. "It takes courage to speak out, and I want you to know that your voice matters. What you've experienced isn't right, and it's not something we can ignore. My promise to you, and to everyone here, is that we're going to do better. Not just with words, but with actions." The room erupted in applause, a rare moment of unity in a town often divided by its differences. Marcus knew there was still a long way to go, but moments like this reminded him why he had taken the job. As the weeks turned into months, Marcus began to see signs of progress. Crime rates in some neighborhoods started to decline, thanks to community policing initiatives and increased collaboration between residents and officers. Relationships between the department and the community slowly began to improve, though trust remained fragile. Within the department, officers who had been skeptical of Marcus's leadership started to acknowledge the positive changes he was bringing. Marcus felt a mix of frustration and determination. He knew this wasn't just about one incident, it was about the patterns and perceptions that had plagued the department for years. After hours of deliberation, Marcus made his decision. He stepped outside to address the crowd, his breath visible in the frosty air. The protesters quieted as he took the microphone, their eyes fixed on him. "Good evening," Marcus began, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. "I want to start by acknowledging your frustration, your anger, and your pain. What happened tonight is deeply concerning, and I want you to know that we are taking this matter very seriously." He paused, letting the gravity of his words settle. "Transparency is the cornerstone of trust. That's why I've instructed my team to release the body cam footage of the incident as soon as possible. We are also launching an independent investigation to ensure accountability and fairness." A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some looked relieved, while others remained skeptical. Marcus continued, his tone resolute. "This is not just about one incident or one person. It's about addressing the systemic issues that have brought us to this point. And I promise you, we will not shy away from doing what's right." The crowd began to disperse, though the tension lingered. Marcus knew this was only the beginning. Over the next few days, the footage was released, and the investigation uncovered troubling details about the officers' actions and attitudes. Marcus didn't hesitate to take decisive action, placing the officers on administrative leave and implementing additional training for the entire department. The decision sparked controversy within the ranks. Some officers felt betrayed, accusing Marcus of undermining their authority. Others, however, began to see the necessity of his approach. Captain Harlow, who had been one of Marcus's most reluctant allies, pulled him aside one afternoon. "You've got guts, Chief," Harlow said, his expression a mix of respect and resignation. "Not everyone's going to agree with you, but I think you're doing what needs to be done." "Thanks, Captain," Marcus replied. "Change isn't easy, but it's the only way forward." Meanwhile, Marcus reached out to Eric and his family, meeting with them privately to hear their side of the story. Eric's mother, a soft-spoken woman named Diane, expressed her gratitude for Marcus's efforts but also shared her lingering fears for her son's safety. "All we want is to be treated with dignity," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "I shouldn't have to worry every time Eric steps outside." Marcus felt the weight of her words. "You have my word," he said, his voice steady. "We're going to make this right, not just for Eric, but for everyone in this community." As the investigation concluded and disciplinary actions were taken, Marcus turned his attention to healing the community. He organized a series of forums where residents could share their experiences with law enforcement, creating a space for honest dialogue and mutual understanding. These meetings were often emotional, with stories of pain and frustration balanced by moments of hope and connection. One night, during a particularly charged forum, a retired officer named Frank stood up to speak. Frank, a white man in his 70s, had served in the Silverwood Police Department for over 3 decades before retiring a few years earlier. His voice carried the weight of experience as he addressed the room. "I've seen a lot of changes in this town over the years," Frank said, his gaze sweeping over the audience. "Some good, some not so good. But what I see now is something we've needed for a long time, a leader who's willing to listen, to learn, and to make the hard calls." He turned to Marcus, his expression sincere. "Chief Reed, you've got my respect. And I think you've got the respect of a lot more people than you realize." The room erupted in applause, the sound echoing through the community center. Marcus felt a swell of emotion, but he quickly refocused. The journey was far from over, and he was determined to keep moving forward. As winter turned to spring, the seeds of change began to bear fruit. Relationships between the police department and the community continued to improve, with new programs fostering collaboration and understanding. Crime rates showed signs of decline, but more importantly, residents reported feeling safer and more respected. For Marcus, the journey had been exhausting but deeply rewarding. He had faced resistance, criticism, and moments of doubt, but he had never wavered in his commitment to the people of Silverwood. And as he stood on the steps of the town hall one sunny afternoon, watching children play in the park and neighbors greet one another with smiles, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Marcus Reed hadn't just changed a police department, he had helped change a town. And in doing so, he had proven that even in the face of adversity, leadership grounded in integrity and compassion could light the way to a brighter future. As the months rolled by, Silverwood's transformation under Marcus Reed's leadership became increasingly evident. Crime rates continued to decline, and community engagement flourished, but the path to true harmony was not without its challenges. Marcus had built strong foundations, but sustaining progress would require ongoing effort and a willingness to confront the difficult truths that still lingered beneath the surface. One of the biggest tests came when a high-profile case rocked the town. A popular local politician, John Creighton, was caught in a scandal involving bribery and corruption. The case had deep roots, touching several key figures within the town's government, and the revelation spread like wildfire through social media and the local news. It wasn't just a scandal, it was an earthquake that threatened to undo everything Marcus had worked for. The situation was even more complicated because some of the officers in the department had unknowingly benefited from Creighton's dealings. The town was in turmoil, anger, disbelief, and fear gripped Silverwood as citizens demanded answers and accountability from every corner. As soon as the news broke, Marcus was thrust into the eye of the storm. He knew he had to act quickly to preserve the integrity of the police department and prevent further damage to the town's fragile trust in law enforcement. He called an emergency meeting with his command staff, but even before the discussion began, the weight of the situation was already palpable. Marcus had learned to read people over the years, and it was clear that some of his officers were more concerned about their own careers than the truth. Still, Marcus was resolute. He knew he had to be the one to lead the way, even if it meant making enemies. "We need to be transparent," he said, his voice calm but unwavering. "This is bigger than just a few corrupt officials. This is about the integrity of our entire system, and it's time we face it head-on. We will launch an independent investigation, and if anyone within this department is complicit, they will be held accountable, no exceptions." His words were met with nods from most, but there was an unmistakable sense of unease among a few officers who had known Creighton personally. The fear of exposing deep-seated corruption rattled them. Marcus wasn't naive, he understood that people would resist. But this was a defining moment, not just for the department, but for the community. He had to prove that the work they had done to rebuild trust could withstand the weight of such a scandal. Over the next few weeks, the investigation uncovered more than Marcus had anticipated. Several officers had indeed taken bribes, using their positions to protect Creighton's illegal activities. The revelations rocked the community to its core. For some, it was a devastating blow to their faith in the police. For others, it was the moment they had been waiting for, a chance to see true justice and reform. Marcus knew that this crisis could either break the community or bring it together. The way he handled it would determine everything. Marcus made the difficult decision to publicly release the findings of the investigation. He stood before the press, flanked by his most trusted officers, ready to take full responsibility for the department's failures. His hands shook slightly, but his resolve was firm. "Tonight, I stand before you with a heavy heart," Marcus began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "What we've discovered is not easy to hear, but it is the truth. Some members of this department betrayed the trust of this community, and for that, they will be held accountable. This is a pivotal moment for us, and we will not shy away from the difficult work that lies ahead." The response from the community was mixed. Some applauded Marcus for his transparency and courage, while others felt betrayed by the very people they had trusted to protect them. The local activist groups called for further reform, demanding that even more drastic changes be made within the police force. Marcus listened to their concerns, knowing that, although the department had taken steps toward change, much work remained. The work of healing and rebuilding trust would take time, but Marcus was unwavering in his commitment to see it through. During the weeks that followed, several officers were placed on administrative leave pending further investigations, while others were terminated for their involvement in the scandal. It was a painful process, but one that Marcus knew was necessary. The town, too, needed to come to terms with the reality of what had occurred. As hard as it was for Silverwood to face these truths, it was the only way forward. Marcus knew that healing couldn't begin until the wounds had been acknowledged and treated. In the midst of this turmoil, Marcus's leadership was put to the test once again. A young officer named Andrew Torres, who had been with the department for only a year, came to Marcus with a confession. Torres admitted that he had overheard some of the older officers discussing the bribes and had done nothing to report it. The news hit Marcus hard. While Torres hadn't been directly involved in the corruption, his silence had allowed it to continue. But Marcus saw this as another opportunity for growth. He appreciated the honesty, even if it came too late. "Andrew," Marcus said softly, "thank you for coming forward. It's not easy to admit mistakes, but you've done the right thing now. Moving forward, we'll work together to ensure that the culture of silence and complicity is gone for good. This department will only thrive when we hold ourselves accountable." Torres looked relieved, but it was clear that the weight of his actions still lingered. Marcus knew that this moment could have been a turning point for the young officer, a lesson in courage and integrity. As the scandal began to settle and the dust started to clear, Marcus focused on what needed to happen next. The community had been shaken, but Marcus saw an opportunity to rebuild, not just the police department, but the fabric of Silverwood itself. He worked with local organizations to set up town hall meetings, providing spaces where residents could speak freely and offer solutions. The department introduced new policies for reporting misconduct, ensuring that officers could no longer remain silent when they witnessed wrongdoing. Despite the challenges, Marcus felt a sense of pride in how far they had come. The community was still divided, but the trust between the police and the people was beginning to be restored. Marcus had faced adversity, both from within the department and from outside forces, but he had remained true to his mission, to lead with integrity and to make Silverwood a place where justice and fairness prevailed. It wasn't just about police work, it was about building a legacy. Marcus Reed had arrived in Silverwood with a singular goal: to change the town for the better. And while there were still hurdles to overcome, he was no longer just the new police chief. He was a symbol of what could happen when a community refused to settle for anything less than the truth. His journey was far from over, but the lessons he had learned and the relationships he had built would guide him as he continued to lead Silverwood through its darkest days and into its brighter future. In time, Silverwood would become known not for its troubled past, but for its commitment to healing, justice, and the power of second chances. And Marcus, the man who had started out as an outsider, would be remembered as the leader who had made it all possible.